Talking Supply Chain. In each episode, top supply chain industry professionals and the nation's top thought leaders join host Brian Strait and share their unique insights to help supply chain managers stay one step ahead of their competition. This is Talking Supply Chain. A recent survey from Boston Consulting Group found that 65% of executives are prioritizing supply chain and manufacturing costs as the biggest levers to pull for cost savings this year. This trumps traditional cost reduction areas such as labor and non labor overhead costs. But supply chain professionals don't need to worry just yet, and Laura Giuliano from Boston Consulting Group is here to tell us why. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Talking Supply Chain. I am your host, Brian Strait, and I'm glad you have chosen to join us for today's discussion. I'd like to bring in my guest, Giuliano, I'm sorry. My apologies, Laura. Laura Giuliano. She's the managing director and senior partner at Boston Consulting Group. She also leads BCG's operations practice in North America. Laura, thank you for joining me. I'm pleased to have you with us today.
Excellent. Glad to be here, Brian. And by the way, it was Giuliani before my great-grandfather came from Italy, so I'll accept either.
So I'm technically not wrong then.
That's right. That's right.
But we'll call you Giuliano going forward. So
Sounds good.
Let's dive right in. The report I referenced in my opening, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was called the CEO's Guide to Costs and Growth, noted that cost management is a top item on executives' minds this year. And I think there are ways to address that without the fear that a CEO is going to come in and just suddenly demand that the supply chain cuts a bunch of jobs, right? So can you get us started by talking just for a minute or two about what you learned through the survey on what executives really are thinking when it comes to cost management this year?
Absolutely. This survey has been just a tremendous set of information and value to us. We were able to run it 2 years in a row. And really, a lot of the insight comes from how executives have changed their thinking on cost management from 2023 now coming into 2024. So a few of the key areas, as you mentioned, supply chain management is popping to the top now as the area seen for the biggest opportunity. But some other encouraging information that came out. First of all, there was a significant increase in our executives declaring that they have the right information and visibility to make the decisions necessary to manage their costs. It was actually pretty low at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023. And now over the course of that year, executives start to believe that they have the right information so that they can move forward and make decisions. That tends to be fairly consistent across markets, across industries. But certainly we're seeing some difference in places that tend to get more hit by things like macroeconomic factors, things like consumer sentiment, potential impact from armed conflict. Those continue to be areas that executives keep their eye on, and in industries that are more susceptible to fluctuations due to those factors, they are the ones that continue to be more cautious across the board.
Yep. So if we're not, I mean, it sounds like they're collecting the data, right, and they're making better decisions. I think that's what, in essence, what I'm getting out of this kind of big picture kind of thing. So if we're not talking about wholesale cuts to supply chain to reduce efforts, we've got to be talking about using that data in better ways and new approaches to creating savings. So is it streamlining existing efforts that you might have maybe in procurement and planning operations, or are there other things that you're seeing there
Yep.
that they're looking at?
I think there's two major categories that I would articulate. The first one is around looking at strategic goals that an organization has and utilizing this cost management approach as a funding mechanism to achieve those goals. So whether the goals be reduction in climate impact or increase in digitization or a changing market position or growth, executives are now looking at the areas of cost management as the way to fund versus a extreme acute need to cut costs for the sake of cost. And so the areas that they're looking at to manage costs in order to go into investing for the future are exactly what you mentioned. So I think procurement and strategic sourcing continues to be a major area for a lot of reasons. But also things like supply chain visibility, just better understanding of the flows of your product, both coming into the factory doors, but then also as they go out to the customer. which ties to this concept also of integrated planning. So many of our clients are recognizing that really there is no historical base to work from. I mean, pre-pandemic is gone. The days of the world looking like that are in the past. The pandemic was a unique set of years for a lot of different reasons. And now companies are kind of resetting, how do we think about our demand and understand how our supply needs to fit. And then a couple of other areas, network optimization, making sure you have the right assets in the right place, and then just good old fashioned lean manufacturing, lean warehouse operations, and ensuring that any bad habits that have been picked up over the last several years start to get pushed out of the system.
Yeah. You mentioned lean manufacturing there at the end. I think this was touched on in the report, but lean manufacturing is undergoing changes, right, in the way we do it. So it's not only now what it means to be lean. I think everybody probably is familiar with that, but it's how you be lean, yet, right?
Yeah.
And how you do that while being responsive to the dynamics of a modern supply chain, where people want things right away and you know disruptions are happening. So a lot of that I think is being made possible because of technology developments that we've had. And there's a lot of technologies out there. I'm sure So, what kind of technologies are you seeing that are becoming really effective at improving the manufacturing process, yet still giving the C-suite that cost management um, approach, that look at cost management to control that better, that they are looking for?
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting because the core principles of lean continue to be king when it comes to efficiency, eliminating bottlenecks, reducing redundancy, eliminating wasteful work. It really is still at the heart of what we're aiming to do. But exactly as you're saying, there's new information and new technology that's allowing us to become even more efficient than ever before and apply those basic concepts in today's modern world. Things like I mentioned before, the visibility point, as simple as knowing when a raw material moves into work in progress, moves into finished goods, and then where it sits on the warehouse shelf so that it can get picked and packed and sent off to the customer. Even just the simple barcoding or RFIDs, the technology has been around for a while, but so many clients now are recognizing that small investments like that are really transforming the way that executives can watch that trace through the business and the way that frontline workers work. Another one that's newer technology, the advent of which we've really seen over the last year, it's extremely exciting. And I'm sure every episode that you record, this comes up nowadays, is
Are you going
generative
to suggest AI?
AI. You knew it was coming at some point. But it's an exciting technology because it's one that is so accessible to the frontline worker and can be put into place with very low investment. And one of the areas that we're seeing it truly transform work is around the maintenance area, both in fixed assets in a manufacturing plant, but also field assets in businesses where you have a truck that goes out and does maintenance, or a service technician that has to go to an individual site. The ability to tap into the knowledge of a broad network and history of all of those repairs, utilizing the newest algorithms and technology and generative AI, is a really low investment way of shortcutting what used to be such a manual, troubleshooting, frustrating process for our field technicians. And the number one way to drive adoption, I mean, first of all, you have to have, top down support and mandate, but unless you convince the actual individual contributor, the field worker, that their life is easier, you're never going to get that technology adopted. But now that a maintenance worker can find, 85% of the time, this is the solution to the specific issue on the specific machine type that you're seeing, and not have to go through a whole chain of different attempts to get there. They love their job that much more, and it drives significant efficiency and time out of the system.
Yeah, somehow I figured we weren't going to get through a conversation without AI being involved, and I'm having conversations with people that AI is coming up in things where AI doesn't even belong, and I think people just want to throw it in, right? Like,
It's so
but in
true.
this case, yes, it does have legitimate value here. In this case, um, one of the points I saw in the survey that I thought was interesting is that a significant majority of executives, 83% in fact, which is a large number as I see it, said that their companies were able to meet or sustain initial cost saving targets last year. So I found that one remarkable given all the disruptions that we continue to have, right? Which add costs simply because you got to make changes right on the fly, and then combination with all the inflation that we've seen in the last couple of years going up, that they were able to do that. um, but your survey this year says that 41% said that those cost issues are starting to creep back up, and they're starting to see those again. So are you seeing any areas that are of particular concern here? Is this a labor related issue, raw materials? Are there other areas that we're seeing costs start to come back up again, and are concerning these executives at this point?
Yeah, yeah. So a few thoughts on that. I think one of the reasons that cost reduction and management has been so successful over the last couple of years is that there's a lot of waste in the system coming out of years of the pandemic with supply
Mhm.
shortages, with volatility, with inflation, everything that you mentioned. But believe it or not, it doesn't feel like it day to day, but we are now in a more stable um, time in the market for the most part. Raw material prices are a bit more predictable. Availability of space and freight and logistics are a bit more available. We're not seeing the wide swings up and down that we did before. And so as companies are starting to focus on their costs, they are able to take good approaches to get it down. Now, as it starts to creep back in, I think there are a few areas that that's happening. First of all, on the labor side, when one cost approach is to shrink the size of the workforce, which sometimes is the right approach, in order to prevent that cost then coming back into the system, you fundamentally have to change the way that your team members are working so that they can accomplish the same amount of value or more with
Mhm.
fewer people. And that's where some of these, some of those cost management areas come in. But if you just reduce the workforce without changing the way that they work and changing the operating model, but you want to keep your top line steady, cost is going to enter back into the system in the need to hire more people. So that's one area. And another element of that too is we saw individual labor rates and salaries increase fairly significantly over the course of the pandemic due to labor shortages and inflation and other areas. Labor cost, hourly rate and salaries are not something that come back down ever. It's rare that you would have someone in the same role that, now that things are settling, we say, no, we're going to cut you down 10% of salary. That doesn't happen. So you don't have a lever there like you do on the product cost side as rates start to settle.
Yeah. So labor costs go up just like my gas costs, right? For my car. Right? They go up. They
Well,
don't ever seem to come back down
yeah,
much.
well, yeah. I mean, it'll come down, but you have to be in some random gas station at 2 o'clock in the morning on a
Right.
Tuesday to
Yeah.
take advantage of it.
Yeah. So as these executives, as these companies deal with these costs, and as they start to see these costs start to go up a little bit, I think the inclination, and this is how traditionally I think a lot of businesses responded, is that we need to implement a short-term solution. So as you mentioned, it may be let's cut 10% of the labor force right now, right? And,
Yep.
and that's the answer to this. When the costs go up, we cut something. But I think what you preach, and probably what what kind of your approach is something a little different, and you suggest taking a holistic approach to cost management. So can you talk a little bit about what that type of approach looks like? And I think more importantly for businesses, or most importantly perhaps for businesses, is that what is the time frame when you implement a holistic approach? Because you're probably not going to see results this week.
Yep. Yeah, that's absolutely right, and you are right, especially at this point where we are in the business and market cycles. We strongly recommend a reset of thinking about what should our costs be to deliver the business that we want to deliver at the margin that we aim to deliver it, at the service levels that our customers demand, and with an employee experience that is attractive to them. So that's
Yeah.
kind of the summary of what we recommend. Now, what that means practically is, there is a look at labor, but the question around labor is what is the right operating model? How should we be aligning our functions to our businesses? What should the roles and responsibilities be? Where is there extreme manual effort that we can reduce through automation or process changes in order to take low value add activities and move it to a higher value add spot? So that's one major piece. And then looking at externally at your supply base is another major move, and truly thinking about, do we have the right suppliers in the right places to serve what it is that we are trying to serve? If you're a service business, did we actually qualify a set of subcontract and service providers over the course of the last several years that perhaps were out of necessity because of shortages? And now that we look back on it, they should not be qualified suppliers due to quality issues or whatever it might be. On the product side, are our suppliers seeing their costs decrease? And are they passing that back to us? Or are they continuing to hold it steady? And so putting in place some of these, it's not rocket science, but the good old-fashioned checks on the business, redefinition of how we want to fit it together, that is what we recommend. Now, from a time frame perspective, there are multiple time frames through the different initiatives that you piece together. And we do recommend, if you're embarking on a transformation, obviously not every company is the same, and sitting down and saying, what are the major initiatives that we want to execute? And what we recommend is a mix of timeline outcomes from those initiatives. So looking at, we use the terminology funding the journey. What can you put in place that is going to deliver value in the next 3 to 6 months, so that you are starting the progress of moving towards where you want to from a cost perspective, but also providing the momentum to the organization and the team members involved that, yes, we're seeing value, we're getting benefit from this. And so typically labor changes, if you do want to shift the size of your labor force, is one that can come out quickly. But a lot of the procurement areas, both on the indirect and direct side of procurement, can deliver in 3 to 6 months if it's in places where you can renegotiate contracts and those types of things. So we look for that wave. Then there's a medium term wave that's usually 1 to 2 years. And those are the places like the more strategic areas of sourcing, some of the network optimization when it comes to like routing changes, or if you're renegotiating your 3PL contracts, tend a little bit longer, or some of the integrated planning, because you have to get through a couple of cycles of planning in order to troubleshoot. And then you have your longer term 3-ish year timeline. That would be building of new factories, completely exiting a geography when it comes to your supply base, building a full digital twin for the visibility through the system. And so creating a transformation that has a mix of those timeframes tends to be the most successful.
Yep. So as you talk to companies about this transformation and as a way to get control the costs better, right? Are there any particular areas of the supply chain you guys kind of gravitate to initially that that are the easiest places to start, or what areas do you see as the best opportunity for benefit?
So my answer actually shifts over time. A year ago, certainly procurement was kind of the number one answer. It's a place where you can make significant changes without having to change your employee base drastically. It was a place with just a lot of inefficiency in the system, as we talked about earlier. And it's also something that can have wins in that 3 month time frame. So it's still one recommend looking at. A year ago, it was probably the most common first go-to. Nowadays, the two areas that are coming up a lot are around planning and network. These are two spots that have often even bigger ticket savings or cost reduction to them. They have a little bit longer of a timeline than what something in procurement can drive. But as we're getting to the point where a lot of executives are thinking to that 1 to 2 year time frame, these are ones that can fundamentally change the way that you run your business. And then after you get your integrated business plan in place, then you can work to the other areas of the business and start to reverberate that efficiency throughout. I think and a bit of it has to do with the type of business you're working with. A lot of distribution businesses nowadays are really rethinking their network and their flows. how many hubs do we have? How many branches? Where are our suppliers versus those hubs and branches? What does our delivery network look like from DC to branch and branch to branch? And then what does our last mile partnerships um, envision? And that's where a huge chunk of cost is. And so for businesses where that's the case, that is a great spot to start.
Yeah. I do want to ask a question about procurement. We have a large following, a lot of our procurement professionals in our audience. So I do want to make sure I get a question about procurement in here. Procurement is an area where I think there's a lot of uncontrolled spending, or at least unknown spending, that takes place in it, right? I saw one study that said that cost reduction is the top priority for procurement professionals, and it noted that 82% acknowledge that their indirect spend is not managed very well, and that they believe they're missing out on cost savings as a result. So I think there's a lot of money there, whether it's dark spending, maybe working with other departments. I've seen some stories about, hey, make sure you work with the sales department, right? So you know what's coming up, so you can make sure that you have, you're spending accordingly. Can you comment a little bit on kind of the procurement space there, and opportunities that you see within there for cost savings, and maybe some transformation?
Absolutely. Procurement holds a special place in my heart. I personally spend probably half my time on the topic, and it's because it is such a strategic backbone of operations, and a huge area of opportunity. I mean,
Yep.
procurement is where sustainability is driven. It's where innovation happens. It's where risk is managed. I mean, there's just so many elements to it. But you're absolutely right. The vast majority of clients that I have significant inefficiency in procurement, and it comes from a lot of different drivers. First of all, procurement teams saw significant turnover through the pandemic and the subsequent years. And as a result, the folks that are in the category management or even category director roles are ones who've sometimes only been in procurement in a world of your main job is to get product so the factory does not stop. That's what we were in for a couple of years, and so much turnover happened that that's what a lot of folks only know. And so now that we're back in a world of no, you actually have a big spider chart of quality, of lead time, of cost that you have to manage. It's a different way of doing your job. And so the areas that really are susceptible to that, I mean, indirect spend, absolutely. Many companies do not have even central oversight to indirect spend. A lot of, especially if there are multiple branches or manufacturing locations, different sites that operate, a lot of that ownership can sit down in the sites. Um, Also, different BUs sometimes will have different management of indirect spend. Plus, just the definition of indirect spend, I think sometimes is not well understood. A couple of the categories where we often see significant savings are ones like IT, where procurement departments sometimes don't get involved. They leave it to the IT department because they're the ones defining software licenses and hardware necessities, but they're not procurement professionals. And then another one where we often see significant value is in something like temporary labor, which again is not something that's often seen as a centrally managed indirect procurement category. Every individual job shop or individual plant hires their own temp, janitor or receptionist or line worker or whatever is necessary. And when you pull that all together and look centrally, significant cost is bled out of that system for various different reasons. Those are just a couple examples.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there, that obviously can be addressed, and I've seen a lot of stories. I've talked to a lot of people that just simply, it's almost like they throw up their hands and say like, "Well, we just don't know what to do," right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
I
it's
don't get
hard to
that.
know where to start. It's hard to know where to
Yeah,
start, particularly if you don't have the data and the visibility to see it. So often we start just simply with building the spend cube, and value comes out of that alone. Just
yeah,
seeing where the spend is on what.
Yep. We have time for a final question that I want to get in, and this is kind of a broad-based question. I kind of want to talk about the what you're seeing the general supply chain market overall here, and to set it up, I just want to say, like we all know that we've seen a lot of disruptions, right, of late. There's a lot of geopolitical concerns going around the world, not just the United States, all around the world, obviously. And then, of course, thanks to Amazon. Thank you so much. I'm sure my drive will be here shortly. We all want our goods like today, right? And we're being conditioned to get these things today. So companies have had to respond to all these different things in the last couple of years. And we're starting to see them diversify supplier bases. We're seeing them diversify supply chains, putting facilities close to end customers. But all of those efforts come with more cost, right? I mean, if you add facilities, there's costs there. You're adding jobs, you're adding logistics costs. So as we going back to your survey here, if we're looking at controlling the C-suite, controlling the spending a little bit better, and kind of getting control of supply chain spend, do you have any final thoughts on how the supply chain professionals can balance these pressures that they face to get the product to the customer quickly, build a new facility, and still control the spend to satisfy the C-suite?
Yeah, yeah. There's a few areas. I mean, step number one is it always goes back to the customer, understanding the needs of the customer, and therefore setting the appropriate goals. One of my clients right now in the distribution space has 98% on time delivery, which is a very costly model to deliver. And when we actually got into conversations with their customers, what we determined was only about 30% of the product portfolio has the need for that type of customer service level. And so
Yeah,
the ability to segment and reduce the timelines took significant cost out. So number one is just truly go back and understand what the customer needs to fit your targets and supply chain around it. So that's one piece. Number two, and you mentioned the fact that we're all conditioned now to order something on our phone and it arrives the next day. But I actually think, and we see this play out in studies, is that customers tend to care more about uh, visibility and predictability than they even do about that turnaround and timeline. And so thinking about how can I ensure that my customer knows when they're going to get something and that it's accurate and they can trace it through the system can provide relief from the need for it to be there the next
yeah,
day. And so changing that mindset helps a lot. And then the last one that I'll mention is nothing happens until incentives are aligned to the goals. And, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. We're coming out of an era where cost was not the primary driver of the business and the primary goal. Now that it is entering back into being one of the most important, ensuring that executive and leadership compensation structure, decision making, approvals and rubrics, role mandates through the middle of the organization, it all needs to be revisited. And then the behaviors, of course, from the executives need to reinforce those goals of cost management. And it is something that we are out of the habit of doing and need to reintroduce and relearn.
yeah. And I'll just add a story from my own experience on the visibility piece. And I understand it's really important. Obviously, I think it's important though that you understand what your customers really want out of the visibility as well, not just provide the visibility. And I'll give you an example from my own life. A few years ago, I had ordered a product, and I got full visibility to it. I won't tell you the carrier it was on, but it shipped from California to Kentucky. I'm located in Connecticut, so it went California, Kentucky to Connecticut, to two towns over from where I was. They then sent it to New Jersey, and they sent it back to Connecticut, and then it went to Massachusetts, and then back to Connecticut. Now, I have no idea why it did all that, but I'm sitting here watching it on the visibility and getting really annoyed that the thing was literally 10 minutes from my house, and now it's 2 states away. Right. So I think visibility is great. And I'm not diminishing that in any way whatsoever, but I think it's important to understand what your customers need to know and what they want to know. Right. And not just provide them everything because you can.
Completely agree. And by the way, fix whatever routing system sent your
Yes, yes,
product.
yes. I don't. I'm my guess, knowing the way system, warehouses work, I'm guessing it probably just got tossed onto the wrong vehicle at some point and ended up going somewhere, and then it got put into that network, and that network went this way, right?
Right,
Like,
right.
but
Yeah,
whatever. But as a consumer, I was very frustrated watching it go back and forth, and knowing that it literally was 10 minutes from my house. I could have driven over and picked it up,
oh my
kind of
gosh.
thing. So yeah, so visibility is great, obviously, but make sure that you're providing the visibility that matters. I think that's the
Absolutely.
takeaway, right? Provide the visibility that matters. So,
Completely.
Laura, thank you so much for your time today. I greatly appreciate it. If people have any specific questions or want to get in touch with you, how might they be able to do that?
The easiest way is via LinkedIn. I'm available on there, and again, Laura Juliano, and happy to engage with anybody that wants to connect or start a conversation.
Great. Great. Well, thank you for the conversation today, Laura. Thank you so much for joining us and enlightening us a little bit. Big topic that we could do a lot more on, obviously. So I encourage people to reach out if they want to do that and learn more on their own. Do that. So I want to thank
Wonderful.
Laura Giuliano for joining us. Also want to thank all of you that took time out of your day to listen to us today. I greatly appreciate it. I know Laura does as well. A new episode
Absolutely.
of Talking Supply Chain comes out each Thursday. You can find it on scmr.com or wherever you get your podcasts, so be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, this is Brian Straight, and you have been listening to Talking Supply Chain. Talking Supply Chain is produced by Supply Chain Management Review and Peerless Media. You can find it on scmr.com, supplychain247.com, iTunes, Google Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts. For more information on this topic or to sign up for our weekly newsletter, a print or a digital subscription to our publication, visit scmr.com. We hope you will join us for our next episode. For Supply Chain Management Review, I'm Brian Straight, and thank you for listening.